the church, and I had a chance to talk with him. And I know the last time he was here was in the early 2000s, when we had just not too long built this building here, before we built the back building back there. So I know it's been at least 17 years since he's been here.
Yeah.
17, 18 years or more. And so, but he's got our Sunday school hour, and I'm going to ask him if he'd come and do whatever the Lord lays on his heart for this morning. So, Brother Patterson, why don't you come on and speak to us this morning?
Okay, well, thank you. It's good to be back. We were talking about that, and actually, it had been January 2004, because that was when we were on furlough, and we were here for a conference, and so it's been at least that long, and it's 22 years, so it's quite a long time. But I'm glad to come back this way. I've got several supporting churches in Texas, but they're scattered. You can't just go and do 2 or 3 meetings real quick in order, because everybody's so far away, But I was in Houston last week, and 1st of February, I'm going to be down in Beeville, down there north of Corpus Christi. So, it's great to be back. I was just thinking also, your pastor has been here then since 2000 or something. How long has been as pastor of the church? Because I was here first time in 98 when you had when it was still that trailer, and with Brother McCaskill. And but I was just thinking, you're blessed to have a pastor that stays with you that long, because there's a lot. I think most churches, you probably see an average 5 or 6 years, and they have a turnover, that type of thing. And to have a pastor here this long, that's a blessing in itself. So I hope you appreciate Brother Holland here. He's by the way, I like Brother Holland because my mother is Dutch, and so her family all came from Holland, so I'm easy to remember. So yeah. Anyway, well, if you got your Bible, turn to Romans 8:28, and I'll share a few things with you, and then if we have time, we can take some questions, and I'll try to answer your questions. I'll be speaking then in the main service as well, and we have a video we'll show, and it'll give you an idea of how the work has gone. But this verse is pretty familiar, I think, to most of us, and it says, "For we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, and to them who are the called according to His purpose." And John 3:16 is often considered the most important verse in the Bible. It's the gospel in a nutshell, and it's the verse that the lost need the most. And but I think the verse that Christians may need the most is this one, Romans 8:28, because all the things that we go through in life, there is a purpose in them. If you love God and you're serving Him, He has a purpose for your life, and He's directing you in a particular direction, no matter what circumstances you go through. And I think, it's also one of the most misunderstood and misused verses in the Bible, because you hear people say all the time, "Well, all things work together for good," and they walk off and leave it at that. But that's not true, because it's all things work together for good to those that love God and are called according to His purpose. Now, if you love God, He has a calling for you, and whether it's not necessarily ministry calling, but whatever it is that you do, that's where God wants you, if you're in His will. And so it works. These things work together for good if you love God and are trusting Him and serving Him. And it's a verse also that, as a pastor and being in ministry, it's a verse that is often used to try and encourage people who are going through difficult times. And we just quickly say, well, keep trusting God, all things work together for good, and a lot of times we'll say something like that and just leave it at that. But when you're going through the fire, it's not such an easy verse to get a hold of, because you're and I've found that out several times now. When you get to that point where you just don't know what's going on, and you're at your wit's end, so to speak, and the verse always works when you tell it to someone else, and now you got to tell it to yourself, and all of a sudden it's a little harder to follow. When the things happen, the debilitating disease or cancer or financial collapse or a sick child and all these different things that can happen in your life, and you start saying, why me? And our brother was practicing that song here a while ago, why me, Lord? But you think that, why me? I reminded of when Apollo 13, you remember that one? And Jim Lovell was the commander. He passed away this last year at age 97. He was the oldest living former astronaut. But he was commander of Apollo 13, and in his testimony, he wrote a book called Lost Moon, and it's about the flight. And it's a very interesting book. But he said there that when it happened, and you remember the famous radio call to Houston, we've had a problem. And he said he was, sitting there or floating there, whatever he was doing. And he said he was thinking, why now and why me? Why didn't this happen on the last one or the next one? Why do I have to go through it? He said that was his first thought when the whole thing happened. And then he got a hold of himself and he said, well, it is now, and it is me. What are we going to do about it? And, in the Christian perspective, when you go through the trials, yes, it is now, and it is me, and how are we going to react to it? A lot of people, unfortunately, will turn their backs on God, and they'll blame God, and they'll get all angry and like that. And but there is an answer to things. And if you'll stick it out, if you'll be faithful, God will reveal to you the good that comes out of it in the end. Now, it may be in the end, okay? Job went through a lot of trials, and as we read through the book of Job, when you get to the end of it, it doesn't indicate that he ever knew why. Sometimes you just have to be faithful through all these trials. And I want to just share a few examples with you from my own life here in our ministry. I started off, after I graduated from college, I went to the Marine Corps, and I was a flight student down in Beeville, Texas. I went to Pensacola and to Beeville, became a pilot, and I was out in Yuma, Arizona, and I'm gung-ho Marine, and I'm ready to take on the world and all this stuff. You know how Marines are, right? Semper Fi and all that. And they called us, about 200 of us, into this assembly room one day and told us they wanted us to join the Navy. I thought, what? You got to be kidding. After all the training we went through, I didn't want to join the Navy. And what happened was the Marine Corps had over-recruited pilots, and the Navy was short, and they needed carrier pilots. And so I had a meeting with a detailer. I went in and said, I'm not interested. And he said, well, what are you flying? A4s? I said, he said, well, I can give you A4s. And I thought, where? They're not flying A4s on carriers anymore. And he said, well, I can send you to the Philippines. And as soon as he said that, it was like the Lord struck my heart with this thought, it's a mission field. And I knew at that moment that's what God wanted me to do. And we had 5 days to decide. And for 5 days, I said, Lord, you don't really want me to do this, do you? But in the end, he did. And I went to the Navy, and I wound up in the Philippines. Well, as it turns out, I did 2 tours in the Philippines, almost 5 years worth. And I was there during the eruption of Mount Pinatubo and all of that. And I met my wife there. And so from that, then, with my wife, we started a ministry in this little Aita village, indigenous people called Aitas that were not far from us. And we started a Bible study in their village. And from that, then, the years go by. And I'll share more about this in the main service. But the years go by, and the Lord calls us to the mission field, and we go to Kenya, And then we're back in the Philippines. And back when I felt that burden to go to the Navy, I kept saying, why? I love the Marine Corps. I didn't understand it. But I've got 30 years, 40 years of my life behind me now, and I look back and it all makes sense, because everything that I did going to the Philippines prepared me for where we are today, because we have a ministry of those same Aita people now. And so, the Lord took us a long way around to get there, but it's all the different experiences and everything prepared us just for the ministry we're in now. And so, by the way, when I first went to the military, I tried the Navy, and they turned me down because I had graduated for officer programs. They turned me down because I graduated from a Christian university, which made absolutely no sense at all. And but they turned me down, so I went across the hall of the Marine Corps, and they took me. 4 years later, the Navy wants me back for carrier operations, but I said I wouldn't go to the carrier, so they gave me shore-based operations in the Philippines, and not only once, but twice, something that almost never happens, going back to the same place in the military like that. And then I got on-the-job training in mission work, and the Navy paid for the whole thing. And so, God got even with the Navy for persecuting whatever Christian colleges there were. But, things like that, it just, we say, well, how does that work out for good? Well, in the end, I didn't get the military career that I wanted, because actually what I did going with A4s and flying in the Philippines was a dead end. There's no future in it in the Navy if I didn't go to a carrier. But I had a good career while I was in for 11 years, and it prepared me for what I'm doing today. And so at the time, I didn't understand it, but in time, it all works out. Well, in 2007, we were talking about my youngest son. He was born in Kenya. He just turned 18 here in December, and is graduating from Christian Unified Schools in San Diego this May. And so he's very strong, very good basketball player. We're really happy with him. He's been a great blessing to our lives. But in 2007, my wife was suddenly expecting, and she'd had complications with our first son, had to be C-section, and we didn't know if she could have any more children. But all of a sudden, here she was, 13 years later, expecting again. And early on in the pregnancy, she started bleeding. And in fact, one night at about 2 a.m, she woke up, and she woke me up, said, I'm bleeding. And I got around the bed, and she was on the floor, and the blood was everywhere. And I thought for sure she'd miscarried. And my older son, Jonathan, and I wrapped her in towels, got her to the car. We took her to the hospital, and it was an hour-and-a-half ride from the dusty road we were on in Kenya. It was in Kenya, and a rough road and all that. She felt every bump and every pain and all that. And we got there, and the emergency room doctor said, well, the pregnancy's over. And we were brokenhearted. And I went out to check her into the hospital. And when I come back, he said to me, now what we're going to do now is called a D&C procedure. And I said, wait a minute. I supported National Right to Life for many years. And I know what a D&C is. And I know it has legitimate purposes if you lose a baby. But it's also an abortion procedure. And I said to him, is the baby still there? He said, well, there's evidence of fetal material, but it can't survive. I said, but the baby's still there. He gave me the same answer. It can't survive. I said, then we're doing nothing until our gynecologist gets here and we do an ultrasound. We're going to find out what's going on before you do anything. He goes, okay, that's what you want. I said, yeah, that's what we want. So we checked her into the hospital, and by that time it was about 4 a.m. and it was about 9 or 9:30 before the doctor got there to check on her. And about 10 or so before we got to the ultrasound, but they did the ultrasound, and there he was, about as big as my thumbnail, and a little black dot was the heart, and it was boop, 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 and he was fine. What happened was the egg had located deep in the birth canal, And so it was almost an ectopic pregnancy, not quite, but it had torn loose because of her activity and all that, and that's what caused the bleeding. And so Leigh had to be on absolute bed rest for the next 7 months, and which was very difficult for her as well. She had sciatic problems, and she was in a lot of pain all the way through this. But the most beautiful thing of it is that step by step, we had to go back to the doctor every month, and they do another ultrasound to check on her, and we were very careful. But when he was about 6 months old or so, we were doing the ultrasound, and he was laying on his back like this, and all of a sudden his face turned toward us, and his hand came up and went like this. I said, he's waving at us. I told Ethan that later when, and he said, yeah, I remember that. Sure. But then, so it was a long period of suffering for my wife, and I kept saying, Lord, why? She went through this with the first child. It was a hard pregnancy, and now we got to do it again. Give her a break, Lord. I kept saying them. And then at the end of the 8th month, she was bleeding again. We went to see the doctor, and he said, we better take the baby now before you lose him. And so we checked her in the hospital, and they were going to give her hormone for a couple of days. But that very night, she hemorrhaged again. So the next day, they said, okay, we got to do her now. So we had Ethan was born by a C-section. And that was on December 13th. And they were in the hospital for 10 days. We got him home by December 23rd. And so they were home for Christmas. And then on December 28th, the country had elections. And the elections were disputed. The incumbent president claimed victory. And by the end of the count, it was January 2nd or 3rd or something, he claimed victory. But before he claimed victory, the opponent started parading around the street, getting all the people together, having big parades, claiming he was the winner. And the next thing you know, we have a civil war breaking out. And it was all across the country. In Kenya, there were 42 tribes of people. The largest were the Kikuyu, and the president was Kikuyu. The second largest was the Luya, and the opponent was Luya, which, by the way, is the same tribe that Obama's family comes from. But anyway, his father, I guess, not his mother. But anyway, it broke out all over the country. And where we were living, north of Nairobi, out near a town called Ruiru, where our work was, we were cut off. The road going into the town, into Nairobi, was cut off. And the road going through Ruiru, there was another way to get there. It was a long way around the city, but we couldn't go through there either because they were rioting, fighting in the streets and everything. And our workers out there said, don't come out here. Don't come out. Well, we were stranded, isolated for 11 days. And it was during this 11-day period that Ethan's due date was. And he had to come C-section. My wife would never have been able to birth him normally. And the thing is this, if he had gone to full term, they'd have both died because we'd have never got him to the hospital. And the thing is, you say, Lord, why? What's the purpose of all this? And all of a sudden it became clear because Ethan was born, he was safe, and Leigh was healthy, and we had him at home. And if not, they'd have both died. And so all of a sudden, Romans 8:28 is real clear to us on that case. Yeah, she suffered for those 7 months, and I prayed and I argued with the Lord, please, Lord, why, and all this. And at the end, all of a sudden, oh, okay, thank you, Lord. We know what happened. We know why. And so God used that. And I'm sorry that my wife's the one that always winds up suffering when these things happen, In 2011, she came down with several issues. One was called a palatal myoclonus, where her throat just throbbed. And you could see it. And so look in here, and her uvula is going like this and all. And she had dysphagia. She couldn't swallow. She had acid reflux. Her whole esophagus was burning. And she couldn't swallow. She couldn't eat. And she was losing weight. And she got all the way down to 89 pounds. And now she's not a big woman anyway, but she was very, that's very small. And all of this kept happening. We saw 22 different doctors, and nobody could figure anything out. The last doctor was the one that diagnosed the palatal myoclonus. And the problem with it is there's no cure for it. And so it's a matter, everybody said, we saw with the brain doctors, neurologists, all that, we saw those, and we saw everybody. Everybody said it's stress related. And I kept thinking, yeah, right, it's stress related because you can't figure anything else out. And that may have been part of it, but I think in the long run, they were right. It was stress related. And one doctor finally said, you need to get out of Kenya and go somewhere less stressful. Because really, Kenya was a very stressful place. We were robbed on our first term. We had shootings in our neighborhood. There were carjackings. We had to be in at night before it got dark when we were working there. And we lived on a corner on a dirt road. 6 cars had been hijacked right around our corner and in the middle of the night. And so if we were out after dark, we would be coming down the road. We had a guard at the gate. And as soon as he heard us coming around the corner, he's opening the gate. We came in, he closed the gate. That was that kind of a thing. And so it was quite stressful. And I thought to myself then, well, where could we go that's less stressful? Well, where better could we go than to the Philippines? We went back to my wife's home. Her family is there. A lot of her friends, the church that we were in, all the people that we know were there. And so we made the decision then. We felt like, okay, the Lord is using this to change fields. And as it turns out, that was right. Because there were other missionaries that came, took over the college, took over the work we were doing in Kenya. So that was enabled to keep going. And we got back to the Philippines, and the church that we'd actually had been married in, they were without a pastor at the moment. So they asked me to fill in. So I did. I said, oh, it's only temporary because we have a goal, and our goal was to reach these Aita people. And so I took that church for 4 years until we had a young man trained, sent him to Bible college and intern and all that, and we turned it over to him. And then we started we'd already started the work as a Bible study with the Aitas. In 2022, then in 2020, we wound up having to come home for COVID because we absolutely couldn't do anything. We were quarantined where we were. If you were over 59 or under 19, you couldn't leave your house. And so my wife was the only one who could leave, and she could only go 15 miles down the road to the marketplace in the next city in order to get vegetables and whatever. And there was no point in it. We couldn't go up to the village. We couldn't do anything. So we came home for about a year and a half during the COVID. And then we went back. And when we went back, we thought, well, okay, we got a building up. It's time to start as a church, as a regular church rather than a Bible study. So we started meeting Sunday mornings, and the work has been going on since that. But it was interesting again, my wife's going through all of this, and we're going to all these doctors, and you're wondering, why? What's happening? Lord, what's the purpose of all this? How are we going to handle this? And then he uses all of that to direct us back to the Philippines. And the interesting thing is, when we were first on deputation, the one question everybody asked us was, well, why are you going to Kenya? Why not the Philippines? And all I could say was, well, we felt like God was calling us to Kenya. And we had missionaries there. They were friends of ours that had asked us to pray about it. And so we went there. And but you know what? There's something else. In Kenya, we found Filipinos, lots of them. And because there are so many Filipinos working overseas, all over the Middle East and Africa and Japan and the Arab countries and all around. There are so many of them that there's actually a cabinet position in the Philippine government called the Office of Foreign Workers. And so they're looking after their people around the world. And we found lots of them there. And we had our own ministry to Filipinos in Kenya while we were doing the other work in Kenya. And so there was a purpose in all of that as well, you see. And then now God has brought us back to the Philippines, and we're able to start this work with the Aita people. Now brings us up to date. My wife's got cancer, and a year ago in December, she was all swollen, and we were wondering what's going on, ibuprofen and stuff didn't help, and we went and saw a doctor, and they decided she had cancer. And the best thing for her, and I'll tell a little bit more about this in the morning service here, but the best thing for her was to go home because they didn't have the facilities or the thing to treat her like she needed. And so we sent her on to San Diego, where her mother and her sister lived. Her mother is being treated for a blood cancer, and it's as cancer goes, it's a minor thing. She gets a shot once a month, and it's contained, and she's okay. But they took her to the same hospital, and so that she could be treated there, and that's where she's being treated now. By the way, I was going to say, I have a few items here I put on display. I don't have a lot because we were planning our furlough for this coming May. And with all of this happening, it's just kind of changed our whole schedule. I didn't get a lot of things together, and I don't even have a new prayer card because Leigh didn't want her picture taken without her hair, and all that. And so I didn't get a new prayer card made, and the old ones I had are all gone. So I'm sorry about that, but there's a few things if you want to look at them. But the interesting thing about it is that we were looking for a Filipino pastor because we're getting to that point where, okay, we need someone who can come in and take over this work because someday we aren't going to be here anymore. And we were looking for someone. We had a couple of men come and preach for us, and we had Bible college students that would come over and they'd help us from time to time. And we were hoping somebody would catch a vision for the work. And we had a couple, JP and Sharon, Sharon was actually the daughter of one of Leigh's cousins. And they came and worked with us for a while, but they were planning on starting their own church in another area. So they came and helped us. Then they go to their own Bible study and that kind of thing. And they helped us for a while. But, all these people come in and help, and they're temporary and like that. Well, we were praying for someone who could come and take the work. And you'll see them in the video later, but a couple came and we had introduced them to the church, and they came and they're doing a really wonderful job. But we were praying about them, and they said, well, they're interested. They were praying about it, and they were actually working in an orphanage. And he has a theological degree, but they were in an orphanage, and so working there. And but they were looking for a change, and so they came up, and they started coming up, and we had them preach a couple times, and they visited, and then they were just waiting for their kids to get through school, and the school time frame is a little different time-wise than in the U.S., but when they finished school in April, they called me and said, "Oh, I think we'll come and work with you." And the Lord laid that on us. And if you're wanting this to come, we'll come and work with you. I said, "Oh yeah, we want you to come. I'm running out of time here." As soon as Ethan and I stayed in the Philippines while Leigh came to San Diego, because he's in the middle of his junior year, and he was the star player on their basketball team. He was their MVP for 3 years in a row, and they're in this conference with international schools. And every year they have an international school playoff and all that stuff. And he was their leading scorer every year. And this last year he made the all-conference team and all of that. So we were happy that we were able to stay there so he could finish the school year, with his friends, and then have his last year was a great basketball season. And so, but we did all that, and so, but we're running out of time. May, we're coming home, and we needed someone there to take over the work, and they said, well, we'll come. So the end of April they came, and we got them established, and they're just doing a wonderful job. They held Vacation Bible School through the summer, and 24 kids were saved. And the youth group, the teens from about age 13 or 14 up to 19 or 20, that group has doubled in size, and they're out they are teaching the kids to teach Bible stories and stuff as part of the Sunday school lessons. And in December, they had a Christmas concert. They invited the whole village up, and so they got the Christmas concert, and they're reaching people. One of our big concerns has been that we could get some of the Aita young people to go to Bible college. Now, the thing is, in the Aita village, their education is really lacking, because for many years there was nothing there. In 2011, the government decided that they want to educate the indigenous peoples groups in the islands, and there's lots of them. In Luzon, where we are, northern Luzon, besides the Aitas, and in fact there are different Aita groups. Our group that we're working with is Ambala. That's the name of their language. But there are two other groups that speak a different language, and they're all Aita. Then there's Ifugao and Igorot and Bantak and Batak, and this name's similar, but there's all kinds of indigenous groups around the islands. And so the government decided we need to educate these people. So they came up to our village, Pastolan, in 2011. They built a school, an elementary school, K-6. And in order to do that, because there was only one way into the village, it was a dirt road, and the village is on the side of a hill. And when it rains, we have rainy season from June to August, and then typhoons until January, and then it's finally dry. But that road, when it rains, is impassable because it's too steep and muddy and all of that. Well, there was also on the backside, over the top of the hill on the backside, there's a trail that goes all the way down to the bottom. It comes out at the golf course, which is where the Navy base used to be. And the golf course is down there, and today it's a Freeport zone. And there was just a trail that goes up there, and it's a dusty trail. Well, they came in 2011 and built the building, the elementary school. So in 2012, they came and decided, well, they need electricity. So the government ran an electric line up into the village. Now, it just goes along the road. It goes along the road, so everybody along the road is connected, but most of the village is out in the hills and in the trees and everything out behind there. And so most of the village is still not connected. What is interesting, when they have a funeral, somebody dies way out there and they have a wake, and they'll come and they'll run extension cords 300 yards out to somebody's house, so they have a light out there, so because they hold the wake all night. And sometimes it'll be 4 or 5 nights before the burial. And so they do things like that. But we arrived in the Philippines in 2013. In 2014, we finally found our way up there to the village and started the Bible studies. We were meeting in the center part of the town, but it got crowded. A lot of houses around, and it got crowded. So one of the people coming, her name was Irene, and she said, well, up towards the top, we have a space next to our house. We can meet there. So we went up there, built a little pavilion over it, and that's where we met for several years, actually. And then, but we needed property to build on. And we can't own property. It's Aita land. It's their property, so we can't own it. So we had to get land donated. And one of our members named Marilyn and her husband, they owned the top of the mountain. And they donated the whole plot up there. And then Irene's family owned a plot next to it. So we got a plot like this up there at the top that was donated for our use. So now we're able to build. And and you'll see some more of that on the video. But we were able to build and get a permanent building up there. Well, as we were moving up the hill, when the government came and built the elementary school, they paved the road up to about here. Now, we moved up to here, and then the government came along and paved the road up to here. And then we built the church up here, and the government decided they needed the back way in, so they graded this trail all the way down to the golf course and made a passable road out of it, and then they paved it. So now we've got a road from either way. You can go all the way through the village, all the way across on a paved road, so the rains don't keep us out anymore. We're able to get up there whenever we need to. And our church is on the promontory. It's the highest place in the village. If you go through the village, you will pass our church. So, we got the advertising right there. You can't miss us. We're there. And So anyway, all of these things come together piece by piece. And but just step by step. And, and we figured that out then too. Why didn't the Lord call us back there in 97 or 99 when we first went to Kenya? And because it wasn't ready yet. We could have been in the Philippines, and we could only go up to the village occasionally when it's not raining, because we'd have never got up those roads, and we'd have never been able. Now everything is set for us, and in fact, they ran the electricity farther up the road, and it took us 3 years. We applied for electricity. It took us 3 years, but they finally approved it, and we got electricity at the church now as well. So everything is going well, and the Lord is blessing in all of those ways. But the thing is, we go back to Romans 8:28 then. So and this whole year, because my wife's been suffering through all this, and there are all the treatments and everything, and I kept saying, Lord, why? Why does my wife have to suffer? And you're burdened for your loved one. And but in the end, in all of this, it's opened the doors. It's brought people in. It's brought the right people in to help us in the work and all of that. And if she is able, she wants to go back again. And so, and I think she will be. She was well enough to travel from San Diego up to Springfield, Missouri for Christmas. We went up there because our older son lives there. And we made the trip, and we got home. And the next morning, she got up and started cleaning house. So I thought, well, if my wife's cleaning house, she's back to normal, or almost anyway. So, when you go through the trials in your life, don't be discouraged. And that's easier to say than, to do. But God has a purpose. And don't feel bad if you have doubts, because everybody has them. It's just, we all do, but you just have to keep trusting and keep praying. And I don't know how else to say it than that. You just got to let God work his will out in your own life through all of your trials. One of my favorite hymns is the Spafford hymn, It Is Well With My Soul. And you know that story about how he lost his family going across the Atlantic. And we sing that, It Is Well With My Soul, until we run into these problems. It's the same with the verse. All things work together for good to them that love God, until we run into the problems. Then we're going, oh, what? But this last year for me personally, everything we've been through, and all my wife's suffering and the pain and everything we've been through, and that second verse of that hymn means more to me now than it has ever meant before, when it says, though Satan should buffet, though trials should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ has regarded my helpless estate and sent his own Son for my soul. You see, when you look at it from that perspective, it is well. Regardless of what happens, it is well, because this is not the end. We are on our way on a journey to a greater end in a heavenly place full of rewards that you cannot even begin to comprehend if you'll just stay faithful. So a challenge this morning from Romans 8:28, just stay faithful. God has a purpose in your life. Now, do I still have I used up all the time, or do I have time left? Yeah, if oh, is it? Okay. Well, then we got a few minutes left. So they may have a question about anything we're up to, our work's going on. We're going to see a video in a while that'll try to put it all together for you. But anyone have a question? Yes, sir.
Yes. Have you learned the language? Is that something, or are you just leaning on your wife to translate?
Yeah. I started learning the language. I learned the language on the street, basically, way back when, and of course my wife. And so we talk a lot, and And so I used to be pretty good with Tagalog, the Philippine language. But then we went to Kenya. And I went to language school and I learned Swahili. And the problem is the Swahili and the Tagalog interfere with each other. One of the things I found out, what we learned when we were in Kenya, was that there are a lot of Kenyan words, Swahili words, that are the same as Tagalog words, but with different meanings. And the one we really took us by surprise was when we first were in Kenya. We went to the local market, and they had all the beans and everything in these boxes out in the display and all that. And they had this little bean that in the Philippines we call it mungu, and we didn't know it yet. But in Kenya they call it ndengu. But so I said to Leah, I said, "Well, look, Leah, we have mungu beans." And all the people around there go, "Huh?" They're all looking at me strange, and I'm going, "Sorry, what did I say?" Well, when we found out it's in Dengu in Swahili, also we found out that Mungu is the name of God in Swahili. And so what I said was, look, we have God beans. And when you're talking about people who are very superstitious, like the Kenyans are, that shook some people. I think we got God beans here. And like that, one word that gave me a lot of trouble was the word ako. In the Philippines, ako is me. In Swahili, ako with a prefix in front of it is you. And I twisted those around so many times. My mother came to visit one time, and we took her around to the churches, and I kept saying, "This is your mother," instead of my mother, and because I kept twisting those words around. But I used to preach in Swahili. Then we came back to the Philippines, and the language of the Aitas is called Ambala, but it's a dying language. Most of the people speak Tagalog, and when they put the elementary school in there, they started teaching the children English as a second language, and so more and more they're speaking English. So So for me, I'm able to communicate, with them. But I never went back to language school. I just thought, well, I'll pick up the Tagalog. I really haven't. I guess it's age, but it hasn't come back to me like it did before. But I try. I translate out. I preach in Tagalog sometimes, or a lot of times what I do is what we call Taglish, half Tagalog, half English, and I'll write out what I need, and like that. But yeah, when my wife used to interpret for me, and then when she came home, then I realized, okay, I've got to do this on my own. So I was writing out the whole messages, and then as it turned out, I'm reading more than I am just speaking, So, but it worked out until Pastor June and they arrived, and that's what they're doing with the work. But yeah, I'm conversational in Tagalog. I talk with the people. I'm not good at preaching because I don't think it, so that a thought comes to my mind, I can't quickly translate it over, But the more and more there's English, the less and less it's necessary. So we get along. Just along that line, you still have to be careful because you miscommunicate. Even though you'll say something and they hear it, it doesn't always come about. One time, way back when I was in the Navy, we went up to the Oak Club for lunch, and a friend of mine and I said, "Hey, well, let's get some pecan pie for dessert." So we asked the waiter, "Do you have pecan pie?" No pecan pie. "Well, what do you have?" "Well, there's banana cream pie, coconut cream, apple pie, blueberry, and pecan pie." So he said, "Okay, let us have some of that pecan pie." I said, "Can you put some ice cream on it, a la mode?" "Oh yeah, we can do that." "And can you heat the pie up?" "Oh yeah, we can do that." Okay. So we get the pie. The little pie plate is so hot because they put it in the oven that it's in a big dish, a big plate like this. He brings it out, and the ice cream is melted all over it. And we're going, okay. He gave us exactly what we asked for. Pecan pie, ice cream, heated, and he did it in that order, and we got it. Didn't quite turn out like what we were expecting, but you have communication problems like that. So, okay. Anyone else? Okay. Well, I'll have I used it up to time. I'll have more to say in the service then, but yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. Okay.
Appreciate that, Brother Patterson.